Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 737. Today we're going to talk about Mini Rogue. This is coming out from Nuts Publishing. This is a 1 to 2 player kind of dungeon crawl, dungeon dive game, but it's all basically played with cards. You'll be moving a little figure kind of through this sort of display of cards that kind of like resets itself as you go up or down the levels of the dungeon. There's various different characters that you can choose to play that have different special abilities, and there's different monsters and things like that that'll get kind of shuffled into the deck. So I'm going to show you a little bit of what's in the main box, of course, but also some of the stuff that comes in some of the expansions and stuff that I had a chance to play with. So let's go down to the table, then I'll come back up here and tell you what I think. Okay, here you can see I've got everything set up. Actually, this is everything that comes in the base box plus some expansion stuff. This is the main sort of difference with the Depths of Damnation expansion. There's also some new cards that you'll shuffle into this dungeon deck here as well, but a lot of them will kind of drive some of these, which are little kind of like cool story events that you will participate in. And just kind of right off the bat, I recommend this expansion because it doesn't add like a whole ton, but it adds to me like kind of just enough to kind of add some wrinkles to the game. Now what you're doing is you're going through here either the tower or the dungeon side. And the tower is sort of like the easy mode side, you might say, and the dungeon is kind of like maybe the normal mode or the advanced mode, depending on how you look at it. So I would recommend you play through the tower. And what you're going to do is you have these different cubes here in different colors, and you're going to have them on your board here to track your experience, your health, the amount of gold and armor and food and all this stuff on that board. But you're also going to track the position where you're at in the dungeon. So if we're going through the tower here, we'll have a cube here. And as we go through, basically, like think of it as like one screen or one level, all 9 of these cards here. Once you go through all 9 of those, you move to the next level and then the next level, and then you'll fight. You can see there a boss there. And then you're going to go here, and then the floor itself is going to change. So some of the cards difficulty is based on which floor you're on. And then once you get to this last spot, you'll fight the final boss. So you'll shuffle up a number of these boss cards. You can see some off to the side there. And then you're always going to have Og's Remains is the final boss there, and he's the toughest boss, and you're basically trying to get his blood or his treasure, to go through and get all that to the end of the game. Now it is a 1 or a 2 player game. You have these little tokens here to track your player, so you can see in this case I have the Crusader like this here, and I would say this is probably the character you should start with first, mostly because they start with a little bit of armor and stuff like that. So it's very important to start with some armor. And you can see here we have little icons there to match up, so it kind of gives you sort of the class type. So if you're playing a 2 player game, it's good to use these maybe, but there are 2 wooden pieces here as well that you can use to indicate, maybe you've got more of a warrior type or a caster type of character there. And there are 2 boards, of course, to track for both players. But if you're playing solo, you can actually play a campaign where it kind of has some persistence, and you can track different abilities on these different skill trees. So I'll talk more about that in the review side of that, but that is available to play through only for single player, not for 2 player. Now the way that your turn works is you're going to move to a card and then resolve it. So obviously the first card in the game is this upper left hand corner of this grid of 9, and you're going to try to move your way down to the bottom, and then you kind of reset all the cards and then do it again, and then do it again and do it again. They're going to move up or down depending if you're playing tower or dungeon. So the very first action of the game is to put yourself on this card and flip it up. So you can see here, for example, we're going to go and resolve the library. So once you resolve that, then you will show the cards adjacent to it on its edge, not diagonal. So we're going to say, let's say we resolve the library, then we'll flip these 2 cards up, and then we have a choice here. Now we can go down or right. So maybe we want to fight this monster, we'll go down, and then we'll resolve that. And then from there, once we resolve that, we'll flip the next 2 like this, and then we have a choice to go engage with a monster or this trap. And so once you get down to one of the edges, you don't really have a choice. You're just going to kind of funnel your way this way. So we'll reveal this one, resolve this, move there. And then here you can see you're going to reduce your food by 1 and then change your level. And then you're going to reset any special abilities there. That's what that little icon with the skull means. So each character has some special abilities. When they use one of their abilities, they'll kind of flip their card over. And then when they see that icon, it's always at the end of a level, so to speak, but it can happen with some of the card effects. You're going to sort of untap or unexhaust your hero then, and then kind of reset everything, completely shuffle this deck, whole deck, deal it out. And then once again, you get to the boss part, then you're going to reveal that boss when you get to that level, so you can see who you're going to fight at the end of that level. And then you can see here's a good example. So if you're on the first floor, again, so if you're just starting the game down here, then this ghoul here will have 16 hit points in a 1-player game and 32 in a 2-player game, and they'll do 1 damage and with a stun effect, and they'll ignore armor. This is their reward, and so on. But if you met this ghoul at level 3, you can see a little bit harder, does a little more damage, and so on. Now generally, sometimes you might get sort of a generic reward. So there's this little kind of player aid card here, is if you get a general reward here, you see you get +2 gold, and then you roll this dice to see what other reward. And if you fight kind of a generic monster, which is effectively different ghosts, these cards might tell you to kind of just generate a monster to fight, and that's what this card is done to do. Now, how does some of these mechanics work? Well, you start the game off with basically these 2 dice. You have one sort of white skill die and then one of these black dungeon dice. So let's go back up to our library and we'll look at a couple of different examples of cards. So when you're on kind of any basically non-monster card, you're going to be trying to roll a success, and a success is always a 5 or a 6. Now 6s are a little bit special because it's kind of an exploding success in combat, and that'll have you roll an additional die and then add that number to it. But if you ever roll an X at all, either whether it's from the exploding die or your initial roll there, that's going to cancel out your hit, and it's just kind of an automatic fail. So if you do get an exploding 6 and you roll the X, you're taking a little bit of a risk there. But on all of these sort of skill check cards, treasure cards, traps, the library, stuff like that, shrines, you're just trying to roll a success like this. And then if you get a success, in the case of this particular style of card, there's icons here. This is effectively called a tomb card. Let's say we rolled it and we didn't get a success here. So then we're going to look at the dungeon die and see what our reward is here. So this would be, we would get some sketches and we would get +1 experience there. So we'll go and increase our experience here on the experience track. And as you get more and more experience, once I get to level 2 and level 3, then I'm going to start to add more dice to my dice pool. And so the next time I were to come to a card like this, let's say I was level 3, I would roll all these dice, and I just need 1 success on one of those dice. So your chances go up as you level up on these kind of skill checks. Now, in this case, if I had succeeded here, I could modify this reward by plus or minus 1. You can see that little icon there. So if I had success, I didn't have to stick with sketches. I could get this one, which is a secret passage, and that is one of the new cards here. So you go and draw one of these, and then you would resolve that. These are called lower cards. Or I could reduce it here by 1, and then that would allow me to unflip my character's ability, and it might be a good opportune time to do that, maybe headed into a battle or something like that. And similarly with, like, let's say the treasure card here. Let's look at this one. So if you succeed here, then you get the reward. So you always get the 1 gold here, or you can fight 2 of the ghosts to get 3 gold, and then you would get whatever reward for fighting the ghosts as well. And then you would also get, this thing here. But if you don't succeed, then you don't get any of it, so you have to skip that. But there's not really any sort of risk there. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. Whereas here, if we were at a trap card and we were rolled to succeed, then we're going to roll these dice. Let's see what happens. Oh, well, I got another success. I'm rolling very well. But in this case, I got a success. So I would look at 4. So 3 and 4 is maze. I would succeed the maze. So I would get 3 gold. But if I failed, let's just do that, then I would get the failure row and I would lose an experience there. So there's all kinds of different things like that. A lot of the sort of encounters or traps and things like that are just kind of roll and see what happens a little bit. Now, if you fight a monster, it gets a little bit different here. So you'll fight it, and you can use the dungeon board here. So we have the tower board. You can track the monster's HP because you might have more than 1 round of combat. So you'll put the token here. See, this guy's easy because it's level 1. So we'll put his cube there on the 6, and as we reduce the hit points, he'll get down to there and eventually kill the monster. Now, in this case, what happens is you roll the dice just like before, but you just are adding this value to the amount that you're hitting the monster with. So I would do 2 damage to the monster, and then he would hit me back. Now, if he rolls a 1, in this case, he doesn't hit me back. If he rolls anything else, he hits me back. Or if he rolls a 6, then it's going to hit me back and ignoring my armor, because any armor that you have that you've marked up here is going to absorb damage there. You can see he only does 2 damage anyway. So if I started with 1 armor, I'm only going to take 1 damage. So we'll just keep doing that. And again, if I get an exploding 6, I can roll again. And then I would get the reward once I beat him. Now you can re-roll these dice. If you spend either hit points, you can spend 2 hit points or 1 experience, then you can re-roll your ability dice. And that's only in the combat. So it gives you a little bit of mitigation there to re-roll that. It's also possible to find some different potions and things like that. You can only carry 2 total potions, you can see here, but you can't have double of the same kind of potion. And just while we're looking at the board, you need to manage your food, because remember, every time you go down a level, you're going to have to spend some food. If you can't, then you're going to lose 3 hit points. And if your character ever dies before you finish the game, then you lose the game. And it's also possible to get cursed and poisoned, and it's also possible to cure that. So at that point, anytime you make any roll, no matter what in the game, if you roll, let's say you're cursed and you roll this die, if it's blank, nothing happens. If the curse comes up, it reduces all of your dice scores by -1. And then if you get poisoned, you will lose a hit point. If you roll blank, then you don't lose anything. So it's possible to get that, and that will act as a hindrance that you want to try and find some kind of potion to cure, or some kind of blessing or something like that. There will be some other cards, like this one here is the bonfire. You can see in the upper right. You always want to pay attention to that, because this will tell you the effect that you immediately resolve when entering it. And again, this would help you untap your hero card. But then you get a choice in this case, so you could either get an experience, get some food, or rest up and heal some experience. And that's pretty much it. You can just play through either the tower or the dungeon, shuffle up the monsters, try out the different heroes. Some of these heroes are from expansions. You can see they have multiples of the different types here. And then also, if you want to add that depth of damnation with these lore cards, and just add little story elements and stuff. Sometimes you'll have games where you draw a few of these, sometimes you won't draw very many. And these are nice little sort of narrative types of things that just get shuffled in. I've played this game, I don't know, I kind of grind through it a lot the other week. But I like say 6-7 times I played it. I think it's more than that, but I haven't seen nearly all of these. So this is kind of a nice little addition there. And that's pretty much everything for the game. Okay, so that is Mini Rogue. I will go through my pillars of review, even though it's mostly a solo game. I have played it sort of 2-player, not with 2 people, but 2 of myself, because you can just easily run both heroes. And there's a couple of slight rules changes. You kind of resolve the cards independently, unless you're on the same card. Then you can sort of resolve them together with the combat. Just a very small rule change. And I think it would be fun to play it with a partner, because I think it could be some fun, some good decision making, and some discussion there. But it's also fun, like I said, just to play with 2 characters by yourself. It works really cool. And it adds kind of another kind of layer to the game. So yeah, so it's good. But mostly it's kind of a solo game, and I haven't had a chance to actually play it with another person there. Playtime, the box says 30 minutes. I think that's about right. It kind of depends, because you can die quickly, so it could be less than 30 minutes. It could go a little bit over. Now, I've beaten the game. I'll talk more about this in a minute with some of the different characters, but not all of them. And depending on kind of how things going, I wouldn't see it going much longer than 30 minutes, maybe 45. But once you kind of get the hang of what some of the icons are, and what some of the rooms are, you'll kind of just get the gist of it. You can resolve things very, very quickly and kind of whip through a level really fast. And so there's a nice little player aid in the box to help you with some of that stuff that'll help reduce your time. The one thing that's kind of weird is the player aid has like some of the icons for stuff there, and then some of the other icons are in the rulebook. It's basically like a 2 or 3 page spread where it covers most of the other icons. So it's kind of weird to jump back and forth. Really not the end of the day, because once you get used to it, it's pretty straightforward. So that's a player count and player time. And if I had to kind of compare this game to something, probably something like a really kind of old school solitaire game like Barbarian Prince, or something like that, which I've played like half a game of once, like 5 or 6 years ago on some app, and I just really didn't have fun with it. So Barbarian Prince is sort of an old quote-unquote classic game where you kind of roll dice and see what happens as you kind of move through an adventure. So some of those older games, I played some of those where they're like a war game, like some of the Leader series games, or B-17 Bomber, Ambush, or those kind of things, where you're kind of driving yourself through a narrative. So it's kind of that in a fantasy setting. But the thing that's neat about this one is actually that 9-card layout. And I'll take a quick tangent and kind of come back to why I think that's really neat, because I will say, so I've beaten the game with the Crusader, the Priestess, the Cleric, and the Mage. And it's definitely important to have armor, I think, in your first game or two, because it makes it a little bit easier of a choice to, if you look at a trap versus a monster. So a trap probably is just going to wreck you, especially at the beginning, because you're only rolling one dice. Whereas a monster, you have a little bit more of a chance to do enough damage to it that it dies, or maybe absorb one round of combat if you have armor, or maybe you take one hit point or something. So, and then you start to get some rewards and get experience and get more dice and stuff like that. And you can get items and put them down in front of you. They will get give you enhancements and stuff like that. So when you get to that choice, as you're moving through that grid, it's like, okay, monster or trap or treasure or this. And after a while, there is a little bit of nuance there to some of that, especially when you have kind of a tough decision. A lot of times it's like a no-brainer. It's like, it might seem like a no-brainer. It's like if you have like treasure or monster, and it's like, well, if you look at the treasure, you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to get hurt, but I should be able to deal with this monster. And the monster reward is going to be much better. It's going to give me, maybe that extra little bit of experience over the treasure to give me that extra level, which gives me an extra die, which is just, way better. Or maybe I'm really suffering for food, and this card gives me food and this other one doesn't, because I don't, I'm going to get to the end of the dungeon, or I don't really know where any food's going to come from, so I need to get that food to feed myself as I go through the levels. And so there's an interesting, not really heavy decision space to deal with, and that becomes very interesting, especially as you start to play through with characters that don't have some built-in armor. If you have armor, you kind of want to lean monster slashing, and then the rewards will help you snowball. You'll be able to get more armor, so protect you from more damage coming in. And then as you sort of level up, you get more hit points and all that stuff, or maybe you find a shrine or something. And so then if you run into a trap and it just wrecks you, it's like, well, that's not that bad. I lose 4 hit points, but I had, a bunch already. So that's an interesting way to do it. And the tower, I should say, is also easier, because the only difference between the tower and the dungeon side is some of the effects will do damage to you and then sort of open a trap and you fall down the level of the dungeon. So if you're on the tower, you still have the damage applied to you, but you don't fall down. And that falling down is really bad because you will sort of drop into a level, theoretically, you won't drop a whole floor, but you go to the next number. But you could drop a whole floor, and what it's going to do is sort of accelerate your progress. Even if you don't drop a whole floor, you're still going to accelerate your progress to the point where the dungeon is basically moved ahead of you in a way. So that's why playing on the tower side is a little bit easier that way. And I have the characters that I mentioned here. I'm trying to remember. I beat the dungeon with the Crusader. I don't think I beat the dungeon with anybody else, but I beat the tower with the other people. So it does give you kind of a way to sort of scale up the difficulty, and there is actually a difficulty modifier in there as well. So you can start with less food or coin or hit points than the kind of the normal game as well. So there's a lot of scaling here with the characters, with the dungeon versus the tower, with the difficulty tweaks in the rule book. So that's kind of a neat way to sort of just keep coming at it. And that's kind of where the sort of addictive quality of the game comes in. And now there also is a campaign, which you play in the most difficult level there is, but when you die, the game's not over. It's just you kind of reset with, depending on how well you did, with maybe some rewards going into the next time. So you kind of play through this sequence, and there's a little bit of setup and stuff like that. That kind of changes based on whatever level. There's kind of a choose your own adventure, very, very light choose your own adventure thing with the campaign. I did try the campaign. I didn't really get into it that much. I think it's fine. It's kind of there. Maybe it's just kind of another sort of puzzle or something to solve. To me, it's fine without that. You just, like I said, you have the towers versus the dungeon, the different characters, and that kind of stuff. So that cycle of iteration and attempts and stuff is fine. So at the end of the day, this is a difficult sort of recommend. It's also difficult not to recommend it because it's so small and simple and cheap and quick to play, and it's really, really fun. I've had a lot of fun playing this, kind of like over Christmas break in a way, and just like, I don't know, kind of, I got an hour, what do I want to do? We'll play a couple games of Mini Rogue. It's just so easy to break out, because it's very easy to break out too. Set up is like, shuffle up these 2 decks of cards, deal them out, pick a character, and go. And that's it. And you're just off and running, and you can just go through, and you can disappear into the game for quite a while. It doesn't really do anything super revolutionary, but there's just a lot of very simple, kind of smart things that it does, which is how you move through the dungeon. And the dice rolling stuff is very simple. There's not really any heavy laden mechanics on here. So I think that could frustrate people as well, because you can just have the dice just turn against you and not do well, or theoretically, be very easy to blow through. I've not really seen a game that was like super easy or anything. Any of the games that I won, I felt like, I made some decent decisions, or made some, calculated guesses or calculated risks, and went after it, and, won the game. And other times where the dice were just like, nope, you're not going to win. Not today. And then that would happen. So that's fine. Like, if you don't mind that kind of thing, and you want kind of a simple dungeon crawl kind of adventure type of thing, I would definitely recommend it. It's not going to blow your hair off. The one thing that I talked about in the walkthrough is this stack of these lore cards. These add a little narrative nooks and crannies and stuff like that. I do think the game is probably ripe for some expansion. I don't know what it would be. You could do some outdoor thing, or maybe reinvest in the campaign idea a little bit or something. Or it's hard to do, hard to do too much, because you'd probably end up making it more complicated than it needs to be, and that would kind of lose some of the charm of the game. But I recommend it if you're looking for kind of a quick solitaire filler. Maybe you could play with your partner. This is a great one, and you don't mind kind of just bad dice rolls, and it's definitely at least a try before you buy, to see if you can kind of get into it. Because if you're not really into just rolling dice and stuff, then this is not for you. But it has been really fun to me, and it's been very addictive, and I had a good streak where I was just playing it day after day, and had a lot of fun. So I definitely recommend Mini Rogue, with the caveat, if you don't like dice rolling stuff, then just stay away from it. But it's really fun. It's really smart and well done. So take a look at it. Thanks.